Hey guys, welcome to the progress report number 1. We'll have a second one coming. I have up here the maps just to remind you of the mode, audience, purpose, and situation. You should have already watched that video about maps as well as done some reading. Yes. So let's move to the second item we want to take a look at. Here is our class. We're in week 7. We're going to, here's the reading I was just talking about, right? It's the mindfulness and writing progress reports. That's what we're working on at the moment. I'm going to open up this one here, the progress report assignment details. Okay, let's take a look at this. Let's make it a little bigger. And yet, a little bigger yet. There we go. Maybe you guys can't see that. Okay, so this should be the document you have in Brightspace that illustrates all the assignment details, right? As the things suggest, you are reporting on the progress you have so far. Now we could look at this a couple of different ways. Number 1, it's me looking at you and making sure you're doing your job, right? Number 2, it's you looking at yourself and making sure that you're keeping on track. This is just as important. You're doing a single project that lasts an entire semester, and it's really difficult to keep working on it and keep motivated to keep doing it without the same sort of signals that you're getting from other classes. So you should have been working on it all the time, or at least infrequently in recent memory, right? You should have done some work. Now, sometimes people view progress reports as a sort of busy work, and this is not the case. I want to assure you that in the work world, which you'll be getting to very soon, progress reports are used all the time, just like proposals are used all the time. Anyone that's interested in a given project who has a stakeholder in a certain project of some kind or funding for certain projects are going to be wanting to have your report, and they're going to want to see a progress report frequently. So sometimes certain types of funding will not even be released until you supply progress reports with all the up-to-date happening. So the progress report you're writing for this class is actually fairly short in terms of what you're trying to do. I'm asking for a single page, 1. Now, if it goes on to a second, that's okay if you need to, but I'm really only asking for you to keep it as concise as possible and formatted as an internal memorandum, right? I find that a memo works fine. Now, it could be a short report, but I find that a memo works really well because if you think of this class as being the organization that you work for, which you'll be doing this for, then maybe your supervisor will be getting an internal communication, right? So a memo. The content should be a project summary. So number 1, we have completed X things, X, Y, and Z things. Number 2, these are the problems that we encountered while doing so. Maybe what we're going to do about it, maybe the plan. Number 3, these are the works to be completed yet. Right, here we have yet, these are the big things going. And number 4, a revised timeline. You should always be continuing to take a look at your timeline and see where you're at. And do you need to make alterations? Do you need to change that timeline? Do you need to add something to it? Do you need to take away something from it? For each of these sections, a short paragraph is helpful, perhaps a bulleted list of things that you're doing, depending on what you're talking about. Note, it is not okay to only have bulleted lists in the memos. That's not good technical writing. It doesn't, it's very, concise and efficient. We like that sort of thing, but it's not giving enough information context. So we want to make sure that your report itself is demonstrating that you have made good progress. You have an idea of where you're going next and how you're going to do it. Okay. Now, so let's go up here so you can see this report formatting. Now, the next thing here is this required appendix. Let me move this over a little bit. Okay, so now at this point, we all need to have an appendix of some kind. And in all honesty, the appendix is probably where the bulk of your actual work is going to come for some of you, right? It depends on your perspective. So there's going to be one of 2 appendices. And at this point, I hope you all paused and asked yourselves, am I doing primary or am I doing secondary? Or maybe am I doing a little bit of both? So let's go over those in detail here. And then I'll go into that more in detail in progress report number 2. All right, so if you're doing primary, okay, I want you to include a substantial chunk of what you've done so far that you can basically show me that you've done work, and not that you've just saying that you're done work. I want to be able to see, it's easy to make some sort of claim, have a benchmark, and then, really you've been sitting around eating Cheetos and you haven't accomplished much. This is your chance to prove that what you propose that you could do, you're actually doing. Or for you to, if again, at some point go, whoa, I see that I'm behind. I notice this. Now what am I going to do about it? What's the plan to catch up? That happens too. That happens to all of us, right? So this is your chance to take a look at it. So if you think about it, the proposal itself was probably due, week 5 or so. And then your progress report is due sort of mid-semester, right? Week 7, mid-semester almost. So it's there's a lot of time that's elapsed between those two things. Things should have been accomplished. It's feasible, it's reasonable for your professor, your senior design professor, stakeholders to assume that you have accomplished something and for you to show it. Now, for secondary research, instead of providing a large chunk of what you've accomplished for, like you have those primary people, you've put together research into a machine or a thing, right? You've been looking at a thing or creating a thing. Those of you who are doing secondary research, you're asking yourself, right, I've been doing research by finding sources, right? That feels like it's much more of an invisible thing. How do I show that? Those primary people, they can show it by saying, this is the thing I accomplished. This is the test I did. This is how it was successful or not successful. In secondary research, it feels like it's invisible. So what do? Well, I'm having you, in order to document it, make it more visible, I'm having you put together an annotated bibliography. Now, let me pull up an annotated bibliography somewhere. Here we go. Okay, annotated bibliography. This is the Purdue OWL. We use it for all kinds of things. So let's go back over here and take a look at the annotated bibliography. Now, you can use APA format, you can use IEEE format, you can use Chicago style manual, depending on what your professor in your other class is requiring. Mostly the APA people would be those of you in the English fields probably, but we can talk about that more as you have a choice. IEEE is engineering format, especially if you're electrical engineering. So every place of business, every journal, all those things have a certain expectation, and they won't all be the same. So the format examples here, we can as you can see over here on the side, they give you MLA, APA, Chicago. IEEE, I can provide, and I will give you some videos as to that format as we move along. So what is an annotation? Basically, it's a summary, right? It says, I read this source, this is what's in the source, this is why it's useful to me in my research. So you can see that eventually you need a minimum of 20. If you're doing a secondary research, you need a minimum of 20 sources for your end product. So you're about the halfway point, so you should have about 10, right? You can draw from your original reading list. You probably have adapted it because maybe once you took a look at some of those sources, you realized they were no good, or you didn't like them, or they took you off in a different direction, and sometimes that's good, right? Sometimes that different direction ends up being productive, sometimes it's not. But whatever the case is, your annotations will have a summary of each source, a brief statement of how you would use the source in a final project or a final white paper, right? So what is this for? How am I going to use it? Okay, so notice that there's the summary, and there's an assessment. After summarizing a source, it may be helpful to evaluate it. How is it useful? Are there pictures, graphs, charts, documents, studies, whatever the thing is, what's in it? Is it biased? Is it objective? What's the goal of the source? There's some handouts there on evaluating resources. I highly recommend that you open those up as well. I will provide this link for you. And a reflection. Once you've summarized and assessed the source, then again, that assessment or the reflection of how is it going to fit into my resource? How is it good for me? So those are the ways it's going to look. I plan to show X, Y, and Z. This is important because, blah, blah, blah. So as far as length, you're probably looking at about 3 sentences per part here. So maybe a total of 6 sentences for the different sections of the annotation, and about 10 sources, of course. Okay. So again, it's feasible, it's reasonable that the midpoint of the semester you would be approximately halfway. Or notice that you were not halfway and need to catch up. Okay, so with the amount of reading that you've done so far, I'm going to be looking at some genre conventions, right? So how am I grading you? That's important to you, right? That means that this, again, will look a little bit like a progress report. And again, we're going to talk more about that in progress report number 2. But I'll be also evaluating things like, how do you do your peer reviews? What kinds of feedback are you giving to your peers? Is it useful to them? Is it thorough? That's an important part of this. It's also important in the work world. When you work, when you're doing peer reviews and evaluations, this is a skill set that isn't natural and needs to be learned. This is a good opportunity for you to learn it. So then I'm going to also be looking at, did you read those peer reviews that you got, and did you revise your stuff based on those? That's important that you hear and listen and do something about the evaluations that you do get. Okay, so that's it for this particular lecture. I went over the assignment briefly. In the next one, I'll be talking about what sections go into the progress report, what we should expect there. So, ciao.